Welcome to the Hard-Fought Faith. Here, you'll hear real testimonies and conversations about people who've walked the hard-fought faith, who've sat in the fire and wrestled with God. We're grateful you're sitting with us. Welcome to the Hard-Fought Faith conversation. Our guest today, Pastor Jason, will share his story of hard-fought faith as he learned throughout his faith walk to surrender to God's will. Pastor Jason, thank you so much for being willing to share your testimony with us.
Really glad to be here with you guys today.
Would you take me back to the early years of your faith and tell me a little bit about what it was like when you really gave your life to Jesus?
You know, I think that I've got a story that I think many will maybe relate with. I grew up in the church. In fact, I was in the same church from the time that I was 2 years old until my mid-20s. And my mom was like one of those. I tell people today that I had a drug problem. My mom drugged me to church, you know, every time the doors were open. I kind of grew up in that church atmosphere. I felt like I came to know the Lord really early in my life. But I feel like there was some really transitional periods where I had to come to realize that this was my mom and dad's faith. And for it to really be mine, I had to take a kind of a personal step into that and choose it for myself. And so that happened probably my early teens or maybe young preteens, maybe 11 or 12 years old, when I finally made that decision for myself to say, hey, I understand what these people are talking about and I'm ready to claim it as my own.
When was that point where you started to realize that it wasn't your faith yet? Was there a moment, or is that something that kind of the Lord started revealing to you over time?
So, you know, I think there was always this feeling that I was connected with the Lord or that I was called, even when I was young. But there was a really finite transitioning point for me. Our pastor, our long-term pastor, the one who had started the church, actually passed away. And we got in a new pastor. And there was like this turmoil in the church. We hired this firecracker of a pastor. I mean, just on fire for Jesus. And but he was young, just out of college, maybe, 23 years old. And the previous pastor, had been there probably longer than this young man was alive. And so when he came in, he just brought this fire, this excitement, this drive. And I remember sitting in the sanctuary, listening to him and thinking to myself, I don't feel like this Jesus, this God that this guy's talking about is the same guy that I've been learning about all of these years. I mean, I've grown up knowing about Jesus, but the way this guy talks about Jesus is like you can really know him, you can really feel him, you can really be a part in a relationship, an active relationship with him. And he was so like on fire. I was like, I want that. I want whatever that guy has. And so for me, it was roughly 11 or 12 years old when I said, you know what? If I'm going to believe this and I'm going to do this, I'm going to be all in. And that's when I really made that decision to follow Christ, was right around that 11 or 12-year-old mark.
Wow. And so really early on. And what did your faith look like in those teenage years after making that decision?
Oh, rocky. I don't know how better to put it. I grew up in that Christian home and, with these Christian expectations. And then I fought, kind of that realm to make it my own. And then in doing so, I had went to Christian school the entirety of my elementary school years. And then in 8th grade, made a transition into public school. And that was like a world changer for me. I went from having 3 kids in my 7th grade class to 8 classes with 30 kids at minimum.
Wow.
And that kind of rocked me. And so I went into this public school atmosphere, and my desire, I think above everything else, was don't be that kid. Just fit in. Don't be the weird one. Don't be the Bible thumper, the Jesus freak. Like,
Right.
we need to just blend in. And that feeling kind of grew into high school. Academically, I did pretty well academically in school, and so I thought I was going to be labeled like the nerd, and I didn't want to be labeled the nerd and the Jesus freak on top of that. So I went into like this mode in high school where I was going to completely and totally hide any of my Christian life because I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be in the in crowd. And so my faith, it wobbled. Tessa, I feel like I played this game where I was two people.
Okay.
In fact, it was crazy. Like my mom would take us to school in the morning, and I would pack my backpack with clothes to change into, because my mom didn't let me wear certain things to school. And I would pack them in my backpack or hide them from her. And then when I got to school, I'd change so that I could fit in, with the people that were there. And while I was at school, I was one person, one way, fitting in with a specific crowd. And then at home, I was a completely different person. I was leading the youth group. I was a part of the praise and worship team. I was like this poster child for Jesus when I was at the church. And so there was this internal battle going on with being fully committed to Christ and doing what God wanted me to do, and being accepted by the world and these people that I wanted acknowledgement from.
What was that tension like in your day-to-day life? You said there was that internal battle. Did it ever spill over?
I think a lot of times, I think the world has got this idea today too. And a lot of times you'll hear the phrase, fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like that's really what I was doing. I don't feel like my relationship with God in those days was legitimate. It was, I almost feel like I was two-timing. I'm dating the world and Jesus at the same time. I just didn't want to tell either one of them. And so my relationship with him was really, I feel like it was on the rocks. He was still there. I still had this feeling, and I knew that I was called. I wanted salvation. I wanted heaven, but I also wanted to be accepted, and I wanted to be happy by the world's standards. And so my relationship, I think, was really rocky at that time. And the only person, or maybe people, that I was fooling were the people around me. I knew internally that there were struggles and problems, and that I wasn't where I really needed to be.
What changed that? What was the moment, or what was the time span that finally made you deal with that and decide who it was you were going to commit to?
Well, I think there are a few defining moments in there, but I think maybe it's important to say this. It wasn't like I said this little prayer and then everything was fixed.
Okay.
In fact, I'll tell you, I'll be real honest. I've been a pastor 21 years now, and God's still working on me.
That's good. Yes.
I haven't reached this place of perfection. I still have struggles, and God is still fine-tuning. But there are some really big defining moments in my life that help me to cross these chasms, these big areas of my life. And I'm excited maybe to share a couple of those if I can, because I don't think it was one specific moment. It was several that helped me really get into place.
Okay, absolutely.
So one of those was November 22nd, 1997. I was driving home from my girlfriend's house about midnight, and on the ride home, it had been raining and I was driving back to our house, and the light changed from green, to yellow to red, and I hit the brakes, and my car hydroplaned. The water on the road kept it, and I slid from the lane that I was in into the lane to the right, and I ended up bumping a car in front of me. And so I got out of the car and told the gentleman that I had hit, I got insurance. I'm going to go and make a phone call. We're going to call the police. I've got the insurance. Everything will be covered. Don't worry. And Tessa, I'm going to share my age with you a little bit. We didn't have cell phones then. We actually, you know what a payphone is?
I do, yes.
Good. There may be some who are listening who don't, but before cell phone time, you used to have to pay money that for a phone that was sitting like on the corner of a street, and you could use those. So I went back to my car and I stuck my head through the window and I grabbed a quarter to go and use the payphone to call the police. And as I had my head stuck through the window, a car rear-ended my car.
Oh, my goodness.
And it sandwiched it in between the car that was in front of me. And it ended up ejecting me about 35 feet into the middle of the intersection into oncoming traffic. And when I came to, the truck that had hit my car had actually pinned my right shoulder underneath its front tire, and it was on fire.
Oh, my word.
And so I'm looking up, it's still raining, the car's on fire, and I'm like, this is it. This is the end for me. And in that moment, sitting there realizing that this might be my final moments, I just kind of cried out and I said, God, I'm done playing games, and if you'll get me out of this, I'll make some changes. And no more than I said that little prayer, a little gentleman, a little Hispanic gentleman, came over and said, "Are you okay? I'm going to get you away from this truck." And he pried me out from underneath it, got me to the sidewalk, and I looked up to say thank you, and there was nobody there.
Oh, my word.
And so it was in that moment there, sitting underneath that car, that became a real turning point for me, where I said, "Man, I really gotta turn things around, and I gotta stop playing these games, and I need to move in the right direction." That was one really big defining moment.
I was going to say that was the definition of a big defining moment. Wow. And you said that there were, after that point, did you said that it's been a process, but did you feel your faith change in a big way, or did the Lord still kind of reach out to get your attention throughout those high school years?
Yeah, high school, like, I still had it in my head. I felt like when I first came to Christ, when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I expressed to my pastors, to the church there, that I felt a call to ministry, particularly pastoral ministry. And heading into high school, I changed my mind and said, pastors don't make any money. I'm not going to be able to live the life that I want to live, or have the things that I'm going to want by being a pastor. So I changed tracks, and I decided I was going to go into robotical engineering.
Okay.
And really excelled in that area. Yeah, they're real close, huh?
I was going to say that's very related fields. Okay.
Yeah, very similar. But I had an affinity for electronics anyway, and it just fit me good. And I thought, this is it. This is where I'm gonna, make my money, and where things are gonna go. And instead of pursuing any kind of ministry at all, I had shifted everything into what I've considered to be a more practical and more economical approach to life. And this event happens, with the car accident, and I say I need to turn things around. And I think initially I'm gung ho, but then life happens, and I get back into routines, and I feel like I fell kind of like straight back into where I was before, that kind of dual idea where I was playing games. And then through that, I'll try and be quick here, Tess, too. But in ninth grade, actually in eighth grade, I met a young man named Elliot, and he was new to the school that we had transferred to as well, and so we kind of bonded, and we kind of made this pact, dude. we're gonna make it. We're gonna fit in. We're gonna be cool, and we kind of leaned on each other through that. And when we got to high school, Elliot kind of fit into a different genre. Elliot was country through and through. I was not, but we had kind of made this pact that we were going to do everything that we could to fit in and to, be recognized by the in groups. And so we spent time together. And Elliot would invite me to things, and I had this crazy dual persona. And so Elliot would invite me to go for the weekend and go out drinking and hanging with the guys, and I would turn them down and be like, oh no, I got to work, and make up some kind of excuse.
Right.
When in reality, I was going to church. I'm like, oh, I can't go, and there's no way my mom would ever. I wasn't going to be able to pull it over my mom's eyes, so I just kind of made up these excuses, and he would invite me over and over again over the years. And when I got into our 11th grade year there at the school, Elliot and I were still friends. We still kind of communicated back and forth, but not one time did I ever mention anything to Elliot about my faith or where I was. And I had this accident, I had recovered from it, and still, when I went back to high school, I kept that hidden from everybody. And one of the days we were getting ready for a big weekend. We had a 3-day weekend at the school, and Elliot came to me and he's like, hey, you've got to come with us. You've excused or made excuses every other time that I have asked you, dude. And this is going to be the biggest party ever. There's going to be beer. We've got kegs. We had 13 kegs that they had out. Man, we're 17 years old, and I don't know how they were making all these connections, but they were going to drive out into the Everglades. We live down in South Florida, and the cops don't come out there. Nobody bothers you, and we're gonna stay the whole weekend. We're gonna stay Friday, Saturday, Sunday out there. We're going to get drunk off our butts. We're going to party. There's going to be girls. He's going through this whole list of things why I had to go. And of course, there was no way that I was ever going to be able to go. I was going to church on Sunday, leading youth group. And so I made up some lame excuse about why I couldn't go, and they left. And Monday morning, when we got back to school, we got an announcement over the speaker that something had happened and that we needed to go see the guidance counselors for our grade. And turns out that Elliot had talked 2 other young men into going with him out to the Everglades, and kind of shared with the parents that they all lied and said that they were staying at each other's houses to the parents. And I guess one of the parents found out and called the kids and said, get your butt home now. Well, all the boys had been drinking, and Elliot decided that he was going to drive the boys home. And so him and 2 other guys got in the car, and on the way home, Elliot wrecked, and it ended up killing all 3 of them. And so for me, in that moment, it was hard because I lost a friend, but I think that it was about 100 times worse, because in that moment I started thinking about me never saying a single thing to him about Jesus, about my faith, about my Christianity. And what went through my head in that moment was, what if we get up to heaven, and we're in line, for judgment, and Elliot were to be there.
Oh.
And I was like, what excuse could I give in that moment? What could I say to him that would justify me not telling him? That I was afraid that people wouldn't like me, so I hid my faith, that I wanted to fit in with the in crowd, and that was going to justify. He was supposed to be my friend. And I have this knowledge about Christ, about salvation, that I've held on to all of this time. And I've known him for years now, and he's seen me, and he's interacted with me, and he invited me places, and because I was afraid that somebody might not like me, or they might label me, I didn't tell him. And Tess, that moment, I think solidified my faith probably more than any other moment. There was a boldness that came over me from that point, because I determined in my heart two things. Number one, that if this Christian faith that I've been following, if it's real, then I better know it backwards and forwards. I better ask every question that I need to, because I want to believe this and be confident enough in it to share with anybody else that I come into contact with.
Right.
And the second thing was that I would never put myself in a situation where I would regret not saying something to someone because I was afraid of what they might think about me. I don't ever want to get to that place in heaven and have a single person say, "Why didn't you tell me?" And so there was a definite change in my relationship with God and my position in him from that point forward.
How did that change the relationships around you? What did that look like for your friendships in high school?
I thought I had this thing in my head that I was gonna lose every one of my friends.
Right.
That I was gonna be labeled, the Jesus freak and whatever, and that I was gonna be the outcast. But you know what happened? It was almost the complete opposite. When I made that definitive change and I started to live out my faith in front of people, at first there was a little bit of disconnect. It was almost like, he's going to be different now. He's going to be this weirdo. He's in a cult or whatever that comes up there. But it didn't really change my personality. I was still the same person. I still cared about them, and we still interacted, but my language changed a bit. The way that I reacted in those moments changed a bit. And so at first it was a little bit of awkwardness, but as time went on, what started to happen? People started to come to me, and they would be like, I saw when that person said that stuff to you, and before you would have reacted in a very different way. This would have been a fight out in the schoolyard, but instead, you reacted this way. And they started to notice these things. And I realized people were coming to me for advice, and they were showing up saying, "Hey, there's something different about you." And rather than being this place that held people away, it really opened the doors for good conversations and to really build more friendships. So it had the opposite effect of what I was anticipating.
So that fear that sort of held you back, when you finally kind of let that go, it was not at all what the enemy had kind of built it up to be. And I'm sure that it can be. I'm sure there are circumstances where a person in your position does surrender and then friendships change. But in your circumstance, the enemy had built up this big lie, and it was just a lie. That's
I think that's an important point too, Tess. Maybe to clarify there too. I did lose some friends over that.
Okay. Yeah.
But in the end, those people weren't really friends. What they were enticing me to do and be a part of were things that were going to harm me, and to live a lifestyle that really wasn't not only conducive with Christianity, but really anything positive for me or for my life. And when I look back, those people weren't really friends. They were there to get what they could get, out of that relationship. And so there were, I think that two things that you said that really make sense to me. Number one, I think it is a ruse and a trick of the devil to make us think that if we do what God wants us to do, if we really step out in faith, that we're going to lose everything.
Right.
I think that's his tool. But the second thing is, I do think that sometimes when we are obedient and we do what God calls us to do, it does create places of separation.
Yes.
And sometimes that means friends, or what we would have called friends. because they're not really what's best for us, in our lives or in those circumstances or in those moments. So I don't want to lead anybody to believe that it was all peaches and cream, and
Of course.
there's no thorns on the roses. There were definitely hardships there, but the end result was much better than I could have ever anticipated. And my life from that point forward was better than what it was playing the games I was playing.
And as you walked in that faith, you mentioned earlier that you had that ministry call and then you exchanged it for that very similar robotics field. Um, at what point, at what point did God, after that surrender, like at what point did God start to really bring back that you needed to focus on that call into ministry? And what did you wrestle with that call?
Oh my goodness! So this is crazy, and maybe this is what we need to hear as a whole,
Mhm.
is that this call of God is a process.
Mm.
It's not like a one and done. I
Yes.
think people think, well, I'll just go to the altar, I'll say this prayer, and then everything's going to change and all's going to be good. But in reality, we're human beings and we struggle, and there are temptations, and we do sidestep. And this area of my life, although I had made this commitment to Christ and made it my own, and finally got done playing the games and said, "Hey, I'm going to be real," things didn't like just change completely for me in those moments either. So I graduated high school. I graduated a year early. I started working full time, and at that time, I went into construction just to fill before I left for college. And I was making good money, hard work, but good money. And that little taste there got in my head. Well, I left. I did about 6 months of work in construction to prep for college, and then I left for Bible college. I did one semester of Bible college, and ended up dropping out because there were some major struggles in my family. Some bad things happened, and it ended up bringing me to a place where I needed to come home and actually help my parents. And I got a job to help them make the rent payments, and so we didn't lose the house or the car. And it was just crazy at that time. So I put on hold with this thought, you know what, God understands. He's gonna see me through this. He knows that I need to come home and I need to work to help the family. So eventually I'll go back to school and we'll get this done, and then we'll pursue ministry. But right now I'm gonna do this. And so I came back from college after one semester, and I got a job in the electronics field. And I just excelled there, Tess.
Yeah.
Within 4 months of being hired, I was hired as a wire puller, and within 4 months, I was running the job site.
Wow.
And then 6 months after that, they had promoted me to another level. And then within about 3 months after that, they put me into management. And I was running 11 guys and the entire service department. And then within a year of that, they bumped me to jobs $500,000 and below, and then to $1 million and below. And I had a company vehicle, a company expense account, and I said I was making good money doing construction. I was making more than double that.
Wow.
When I was doing the electronics. And so I bought my first house, I got married, and started working on a family. All the time, I just completely and totally put aside the calling and the ministry. And now listen, I was still a good Christian guy. I was still going to church every week. I still put my tithe in the church. So I was checking all the Christian boxes and doing the Christian things. But deep in my heart, I knew that I wasn't doing what I was called to do. So things didn't just magically come together, and then I was, doing everything that God wanted me to do. I was still, kind of working through life, if you will.
Right.
So in those times or those moments there came a point when the pastor of the church that I was attending showed up at my house after work one day, and he was like, "Jason, we need to talk." And I was like, "Okay, come on in." And so he came in, he sat down, he says, "Hey, I'm here because I want you to be the youth pastor." And I was like, "Yeah, right." And he was like, "No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I want you to be the youth pastor." And I immediately was like, "Nope, not happening, man. I've got a job. I work a lot." Um, and then he was like, "I think that you're neglecting your calling." And I got like upset with that. I was like, "You don't know what my calling is. You don't know what God is telling me to do." And I think I reacted that way because of conviction.
Right.
I think I knew that. And he said to me, it was actually really sweet, but he came in and he's like, "Jason, anytime you take the opportunity to share what God has laid on your heart, people respond to that. And you know that you've got a gifting in that area to speak. And you've expressed to me that God called you to ministry, particularly pastoral ministry, when you were younger, and you've just let that go. You've let life get in the way." And I started to get angry with this guy. I'm like, "Dude, this is not your place. Listen, you don't get to be my convictor. You don't get to be my judge. I'm here. I'm taking care of my family. I'm tithing. I'm going to church. I'm a good Christian guy." And he pressed me and he said, "Jason, I'll make you a deal. If you will promise me that you will pray earnestly over this position and God tells you no, I'll leave you alone." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "But until God tells you no, I'm going to bother you every single day." And I'm like, "What is this guy?" I'm like, "Man, I'm in a crazy church." And I said, all right, Pastor, I'll pray over it. I promise you." And I said, "Now get out of my house." So I was nicer about it. I didn't kick him out, but I was like, "Man, this guy's like brazen." And he, that night, I was sitting in bed and I could not sleep. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I got to be up at 6 for work. And it's eating me up because I know everything inside me knows that God called me and that he was right, that I had been dodging my call and I had been disguising it by saying I'm a good person and I'm doing good things and I'm going to church and I'm paying my tithe and I'm supporting my family. I used those kind of as an escape, but I knew I wasn't where God wanted me to be. And that night at 2 a.m. Was another place of surrender for me. And I said, "Okay, God, if you want me to do this, I'll do this." And that started a journey for me, Tess. The long story short is I ended up youth pastoring. I started with 6 kids. And in the course of the next 3 years, we went from 6 to 106 teenagers. Wow. And the Lord convicted me again in that. And he said, "Hey, you're only doing this part-time. You're showing up one day a week. And that's not what I called you to. I called you to ministry, to be a pastor, Jason." And I was like, but I make good money and I've got a good job and I got a lot of people counting on me. I'm collecting multi-million-dollar checks for this company. And I've got an expense. I went through all of these things. And at the time, I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old little girls. And the Lord stepped in again at that point and said, "I want you to leave all of that and go to full-time ministry." Wow. And so it was another struggle for me. And I don't know how much time we have, Tess, but that story is a little crazy too, about how he worked me into that position.
I would love it. I think time is fine if it's okay if you don't mind sharing a little bit of what that looked like, because
Yeah,
I can feel it in the pit of my stomach, that feeling of when God asks you for something so big, how do you open your hand? We trust him. How do you open your hand? I would love that. I would love to hear more about that.
It wasn't easy. I will share that with you, and I'll try to give you the abbreviated version. But
Sure.
you know what? In this, God shows up so mightily. I think that this was probably one of the biggest decisions of my life. To leave the comfort of what you've established and what you've worked for, what you know is true, to go to a place of unknown, especially when you've got a family. Like I felt like, as the father, as the husband, that it was my job, my role, to protect my family, to provide for my family, and to make this transition from full-time secular work into full-time ministry was going to create some major issues. I had received a call and a job offer for a full-time ministry position in Ohio. Now, mind you, I'm living in South Florida.
Right. Oh.
I had never even seen snow prior to this. And the Lord opens up this door for a place, roughly 16-hour drive away. I live within a couple of blocks of my mom and my dad and my aunts and uncles and my family. I'm in the same church that I was since I was 2. I work in the same neighborhood. I mean, it's just comfortable for me. We own our own home. It's just everything seemed like it was great. Like I'm in a really good position. Why do we need to change things? And then I get this job offer for a ministry position, and the ministry position is less than half of what I'm currently making. It doesn't include a home or any of the amenities that sometimes pastors are afforded in those. It's in a little town that it was in Coshocton, and I could hardly pronounce it, let alone know what was in store there. And the long story short is, my wife and I prayed over this and agonized over it, and ended up coming to this clear-cut decision together that this is what God wanted for us, that we were going to make this sacrifice and go. And we get there, we pack up everything, we say our goodbyes, which was very difficult, especially for my parents and the kids. It was kind of like we're moving away, and we get there, and they were supposed to have a home for us, and that had fallen through. So we get there and we don't have a place to live. We end up moving in with the other pastor that hired us for a couple of months, and we live in their living room, all of our stuff in storage. And then about a month or so after living with this couple, a house opens up that one of the church members owns and is remodeling to sell. And the remodel is done, and they said, "Hey, you can live in here until we sell it." I said, "Okay, great. That sounds good." So we move out of the pastor's house and into this rental house, and we're there for a couple of months. And then we get this phone call. This phone call is, "Hey, we sold the house. You got a week to move out." And I got to tell you that if there was a moment that really rocked my world, I can think back on these moments, when I was trapped under the truck. Mm-hmm. And it was on fire, and I thought I was going to die. When Elliot passed, and I thought, man, I never said anything to him. Those, are major moments in my life. Now I'm actually doing, but then I felt like those were almost justified because I was hiding from God, running from God, not doing what I was supposed to do. But this time I took a position to go into full-time ministry so that I could do what God wanted me to do.
Right.
And then I felt like, are you kidding me? God, I've dropped everything. I have altered my entire life. I've taken pay cuts, and now we're sitting over here, and this is happening. And so I'm listening to this. We had our house in South Florida up for sale this whole time, and it still hadn't sold. And so we couldn't just go buy another house. We were waiting on the sale of a house. The church was supposed to have something for us, but they didn't have the means or finances to make it available. And what they had originally had fallen through. We're sponging off of some guy in the church, and they were super generous to us to let us use it. But now I'm sitting on the front porch of this house, listening to this phone call saying, hey, I've got a week. And I get off the phone and it starts to sink in. I've got to go in there and I got to tell my wife and my 3-year-old and 5-year-old little girls that we've got to move out of this house and that we don't have anywhere else to go and we're going to be homeless. And I just broke in that moment, Tess. I started crying on the front porch. And I was like, God, what are you doing to me? And there was something that kind of rose up inside me. And I think maybe this is a word for your viewers or listeners today. Because I thought in that moment, I've done all of this for you, God, and you're letting me go. You're just letting me flounder, and this is your fault, God. And I was angry. And I think maybe it's important for people to know it's okay to be mad at God. He's big enough to handle us being angry.
Yeah.
But there was something that changed in that moment there. I'm crying on that front porch, and I started to think back across my life. And while I was sitting there thinking, I was thinking about all of the times that I didn't know what was going to happen, and that God just showed up, that he just came through, that in the last moment, and that, you know what? God brought me this far, and it's my job to trust him. And so I started to kind of wipe the snot and, tears away, trying to man up to go back in to talk with Missy. And I said, okay, I'm going to pray. And so I prayed in that moment, and I said, God, I'm doing this for you. That's the bottom line. I've left everything, and this is what I believe you've called me to. And now it's your problem. You know what's going on, and we don't have anywhere to go, and we're doing this for you. So God, you're going to have to fix it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell Missy and the kids, and then we're going to take it one day at a time. But God, this is your problem to fix, and I'm just going to trust you. I'm going to trust that you're going to take care of it. And so I closed out the prayer. And Tess, God's honest truth. I walked up to the front door. I opened up the door to walk in, and Missy was standing there, and she saw me, and she realized right away that I had been crying. I had that big old puffy eyes, and it was like those ugly cries, And she saw me. Her face kind of dropped, and she's like, "What?" And as I'm trying to muster up the courage to tell her, my phone rings. I have never been so happy for a phone call in my whole life. I was like, I can't tell you right now, phone's ringing, I'll talk to you in a minute. So I left my poor wife hanging, and I turned around and went back out the front door and answered the phone. Now, Tess, listen, it was the realtor from Florida. And the realtor said, "Hey, Jason, I hope everything's going okay. Do you have a minute to talk?" And I was like, "Oh, please, God, don't be bad news."
Yeah.
And she said, "Jason, I just want you to know that we had a couple call today interested in the house. And they came by, they took a look at it, and they said that they want it. And I told them that we had a couple of people who have looked at it. And she said they came back and made an offer above your asking price. They're already pre-approved, and they had a check in hand. So I'm taking it to the bank today. You're going to sign the papers later this afternoon, and you'll have a check by the end of the week.
Oh.
Go buy a house," is what she told me. And I dropped to my knees in that moment. They're sitting outside the doors. I just, there was nothing left in me in that moment. And I got the opportunity to turn around and go back in and tell my wife, what had just taken place and happened. But I think that was another defining moment for my faith. It was hard to make those places of surrender, but it was through those places of obedience. Tess, I think this way is the best way to say it. In the hardest moments of my Christian walk, they have turned out to be the greatest opportunity to see God move in a way that I never thought or expected. They've also been the places where I think my faith has grown the most, because I have seen God move in the greatest capacity in those moments. And from that point forward, I feel like there's been an alter in my character. I'm a different person today because of those moments that I've encountered. And I'm not saying that there isn't still struggles in my life now when in regards to my faith, but because of what I've seen God do, I am much more apt to listen.
And would you change any of it if you had to go back? Not, stop the bad things from happening, but if you had to decide again, if you were going to follow the Lord on this road where there is cost, where there is surrender, where there is that, wondering what would happen, would you change anything?
You know what? I think that's a dangerous question. Because I think that when you ask people, is there ever a moment in your life that you would go back in time and change? I think everybody would say yes.
Sure.
Because there are things that we want to alter. But I will tell you this in earnest. No, I am a different person today because of what I've experienced. I am the man today because of those, life-altering situations. I think that what I would have liked to have seen is for me to make that decision much sooner than I did.
Yeah.
I wonder today kind of where I would be if I would have just said yes instead of playing the games. If I would have gotten past those fears, if I would have not cared about what everybody else was going to think about me and gaining their approval, and I would have just said, I'm going to be who God called me to be. Like, I wonder at times, what that outcome would have been. And I wish that I would have just been all in sooner than what I was, but I wouldn't change it. I feel like I'm a blessed man today because of what God has done.
Thank you so much, Pastor Jason, for sharing your story and for your honesty and for being very open about that this Christian walk is not necessarily one where you make a decision and things line up, but that there is wrestling and there is having to step out in faith. So thank you so much for your honesty and for sharing your hard-fought faith.
Yeah, and if I might just give a word of encouragement to those who are listening today who may be on the fence or
Yes.
struggling with making that decision, I would just encourage you. Sometimes the steps that have to be done, they seem overwhelming. Maybe it's you've got so much to change or so much to do to maybe get to where God wants you to go. But God isn't wanting you to make all of those changes at once. He's not expecting you to become this perfect, person. What he wants is for you to just take the next step.
Yes.
And so if we're willing to just take one step in the right direction, God will help us with the subsequent ones. And so I might just challenge people, take the next step, whatever that looks like. And you know what, you might be surprised to see what God can do through you and in you and around you because of that one act of faith and obedience.
Amen. Thank you so much.
You got it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for sitting with us today in this episode of The Hard Fought Faith. Are you in a valley season? Or do you know someone who is? We would love to walk with you at thehardfoughtfaith.com. You can find other podcasts, resources for children, as well as devotionals and journal pages that walk alongside those seasons of hard-fought faith. We would love to connect with